Hello and welcome to Past, Present, Future Cast, the podcast that's also a tarot reading. I am your host, Maria Elena Pakoulis, and I am recovering from a cold this week. So if I sound a little stuffy, that's why. I have also recorded multiple interviews this week that will be coming out in the coming months. So while I, hopefully, will be fully recovered soon, my slightly congested voice will continue to live on through this podcast for a little while to come. Exciting. Let us get into the card of the week. We are looking at the week March 2nd through March 8th. I cannot believe it is March. For our card of the week this week, I have pulled out the Brady Tarot. The Brady Tarot is by artist Emmy Brady, and the guidebook is written by one of my most favorite tarot authors, Rachel Pollack, the late, great Rachel Pollack. I'm so happy to have this deck. It is beautiful. It's very much inspired by nature. It's not one that I read with regularly. Because of the size of the deck, it's a little bit too big for my hands, and the cardstock is really thick, so it's difficult for me to shuffle in the way that I like to shuffle. But one of the fun things about this podcast is with doing these cards of the week pulls and with doing these pulls for the interviews, I've been able to experiment a little bit more with the decks that I'm working with. So our card of the week, again, March 2nd through March 8th, is the Emperor. Number 4 in the major arcana. The Emperor in this deck features an elk. There's also an eagle. They're at the peak of a mountain. The landscape is harsh. No life is growing here on top of this mountain. The elk is braying his victory from the mountaintop, and below we see 2 ram skulls that are pierced on stakes below the elk and the eagle on the mountain. There's a red border in this deck. That red border indicates our connection between this card and the element of fire. Rachel Pollack in the guidebook for this deck writes that this card shows the isolation and loneliness that comes from domination and supremacy culture. That's not a direct quote, that is the paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially Rachel Pollack is writing that this card is showing the isolation and loneliness that can come from domination. This modern take on the Emperor card is acknowledging that Emperor energy is deeply corrupted in current practice. We see far more of the corrupted emperor seeking domination than the benevolent leader who strives to provide structure and protection for those they are responsible for. That's the emperor in its healthiest expression, is a benevolent leader who is providing structure and safety for those in their charge, for those who they are responsible for those who they have a duty to. This is Major Arcana card number 4. And the number 4 is associated with security, structure, rules, order, foundations. And there is safety in these concepts. There is safety and security in these concepts when they are not taken to the extreme. When the Emperor remembers that the inherent power of this role, the role as Emperor, is meant to be in service to those with the least amount of power, that's when justice can be present, and that's when justice can flourish. Pollack points out that in this image, the antlers on this elk have 11 points. 11 is the number of justice in the major arcana, so it's connecting this to the justice card. On a more personal level, the Emperor invites us to stand our ground, to hold our boundaries, and to remember who we are responsible for. We are responsible to ourselves, first and foremost, and we are also responsible to those who are dependent upon us or those who we are interdependent with, who we have an interdependence with. The Emperor is associated with the sign of Aries in astrology, so there is a bit of a sense of holding our ground, standing our business, being willing to fight for what we need to fight for, being willing to fight for justice, to fight for what is right. The corrupted or unhealthy emperor is going to be fighting for some different things. If you want to see some examples of what that looks like, turn on the news, turn on a press conference, turn on a White House briefing. But when we're thinking about the emperor in its healthiest expression, how the tarot wants to see us embody the emperor, when we create structure and routine for ourselves to ensure that our basic needs are met, our softer, more creative, less linear sides can feel safe and nourished and therefore actually flourish. How can you be your own daddy, right? Aries, the emperor. Even Rachel Pollack in this guidebook notes that this is indicative of father figures. I can be your father figure, put your tiny hand in mine. Are we all on that TikTok trend? I didn't see that movie. What's it from? Baby Girl. I didn't see Baby Girl. Because I was hoping the dude was the baby girl in the movie. Turns out it was that. It's not Reese Witherspoon. It's not Gwyneth Paltrow. The blonde actress in Baby Girl. I thought she was going to be the emperor. I thought she was going to be daddy, right? So how can you be your own daddy right now and ensure that you are creating the structure for your life to allow your creative inner empress to flourish? In my life, my partner and I recently created an actual list of chores that need to be accomplished in our house each month. We created a checklist. We wrote out what needs to be done each month and put ourselves on a schedule to achieve that. And that's our way right now of embracing that emperor energy so that we can both work together to create an equitable system where we're each giving a little bit towards maintaining our home, maintaining our basic needs, so that we can each feel more free to dedicate the rest of our time to our individual creative pursuits. So when we have that emperor structure, it helps us to flourish in that empress creativity. This week I'm giving you some journal prompts. These can also be tarot card pull prompts around the idea of the emperor, the archetype of the emperor. And I'm going to be posting these prompts. I'm going to read them to you now, but I will also be posting them text-based so you can take a look, read them out for yourself to Patreon. So patreon.com/Persephonic. You can join for free. I do not have any paid tiers up right now. There will be some in the future, but these are going to be geared more towards folks who want personal tarot readings. As of right now, that's what I'm planning. But right now there is a free Patreon page that you can go on where I will be posting tarot-inspired journal prompts, tarot card spreads, blog posts, whatever else I think is going to kind of suit that platform. The way that I've done this is I've revived a Patreon that I actually started back in 2021. I revived that. I'm keeping all the past posts up, and I'll just start posting anew. Because when I went in and I rediscovered this Patreon page, I discovered there's some good writing still on there. There's some nice card pulls and musings about different cards and some other interesting stories on there. Feel free to check those out if you would like. All of those posts are again available for free. So check it out and sign up at patreon.com/Persephonic. So here are those journal prompts inspired by the Emperor card. Sit with them this week, pull some cards around them, consider the questions. If that invitation feels right for you to accept it. If not, leave it here. What do the personal rules, boundaries, and structures I create for myself say about my relationship to the archetype of the Emperor? Where would it serve me to have more rules, boundaries, and structures in my life? Where would it serve me to loosen up on my rules, boundaries, and rigid structures? What are examples of Emperor energy that I admire in the world? What are examples of Emperor energy that I know is unhealthy or corrupted? How can I embody Emperor energy in a way that subverts and resists the corrupted Emperor? Two last points. Housekeeping. Thank you so much to everyone who has reached out with kind words about this podcast. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. This project has been so much fun. And here we are, 1 month in. I have so many interviews already recorded and ready to share with you. We'll keep rolling them out 1 week at a time. If you are enjoying this podcast, if you've shared some kind words with me, I really encourage you to leave a review, maybe leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find this show. Leaving a little review, leaving a comment, leaving a positive rating goes a long way to helping me continue to get this show out there and to help folks find the wonderful creatives that I am interacting with and chatting with every single week. Speaking of, this upcoming interview was so much fun. I speak with astrologer Tasha Beg about her journey from being a former Wall Street analyst to now an evolutionary astrologer and the pop astrologist. We had a little bit of tech issues towards the end, so you'll hear me kind of exclaim at one point. I say, oh shit, and then Tasha's video cuts out for a second, but then it all comes back together. We laugh about it. We laugh about the Mercury and Pisces of it all, and we get right back into it. So just a little note. I hope you enjoy this interview with Tasha Beg. Hello, I am here with Tasha Beg. Tasha is a former Wall Street analyst turned intuitive astrologer and pop culture pundit. Did I just see you on TMZ, Tasha?
Oh my god, yes, you did. It's so funny. I found myself, like, now, I guess, coming on TMZ to opine. Not that I'm an actual employee on the role or anything, but it is a nice way to practice my pop culture punditness.
I love that. I love that. You were talking about, I think you were talking about Blake
Bl
and
Oh, the Baldoni, Blake, Ryan of it all,
yeah,
yes,
that whole thing.
indeed. Oh, there's so much to talk about. I mean,
Whose side are you on right now? On the
oh,
record.
I am a no one side. I'm a no sider, I would like the freedom to read both sides to
Mm.
filth if I need to, right? So it gives me some space. But I must say, I am not necessarily the biggest fan of Ryan and Blake historically. So it
Mm.
doesn't, I mean, it factors into some bias, of course, but I can hold space for just how much healing everyone needs in the room?
Yes, amen to that. Oh my gosh. So I'm obsessed with this Wall Street to astrologer pipeline, and we'll definitely talk about your past, your past as a Wall Street analyst. But what does your work look like in the world right now? Where is your focus directed?
Hmm.
What's the tea with you?
Yeah, so I mean, total 180, right? It's definitely a lot more freelance, a lot more loosey goosey, but still a lot of hard work as a spiritual healer entrepreneur, understand, I guess. My time is really kind of split up half and half without even really trying. So on the one side, I have a lot of client work I do, whether it's like one-off readings or longer term work with clients. So, I see them monthly, I pull cards for them. It's kind of like a really nice pseudo therapist type of experience if you're looking for something more holistic to add to your support system. And then the other side of me, really spends a lot of time in entertainment and pop culture. And I kind of consider myself a breaking news reporter. I put them in, quotes because what I'm really doing is breaking down the astro weather behind the breaking news report. So I kind of combine both my loves for astrology and entertainment into this channel. So, yeah, and I guess I also run retreats. LOL. I guess I also run retreats.
Oh,
So,
yeah, you just came
you know,
back from one, right?
I did, yes. My high priestess retreat. I do one in Mexico, usually during the winter for the new moon in Aquarius, but this year was for Venus retrograde or Venus retro shade as well.
I have so many questions, and I'm like, which one do I want to go for first? With your work as an astrologer, what approach do you take to
Hmm.
astrology? What's your focus, since there's so many ways
Yeah.
of approaching the practice?
Totally, totally. And to me, it's kind of like art interpretation. Like everyone has their own style. There's no wrong.
Mhm.
So for me, I consider myself an evolutionary astrologer. So, karma, the nodes, those things really do matter for me. Metaphysicality, that's not a word, but we're just going to add that in. And spirituality, like that's really why I got into astrology was actually, on Wall Street having this toxic workplace environment. Astrology was kind of a really helpful tool in giving me the courage to leave. And so I take astrology incredibly seriously, even though I do a lot of pop culture. And I know a lot of folks, kind of side eye, like, oh, astropop or pop culture astrology or whatever. And I don't know, there was like a personal mission of reclaiming it on some level. And I think that's kind of how I view life a little bit too. It's serious, of course, and there should be intention behind it, but you can have fun with it and we don't have to take everything so seriously. So, in my sessions, I do think that, it admittedly isn't going to necessarily be, just high level. We're going to talk about what advice here and there you should do for this season or whatever. Like for me, I'm a pretty Plutonic person. I have Pluto on my ascendant as a Scorpio rising, right?
Mm.
So I take Pluto's heed, I guess, or I heed Pluto's call. And whatever truth I'm being asked to illuminate in the chart, I will naturally kind of pull it out. So it's definitely a soul depth type of conversation, but I definitely, try to keep it quote unquote light with pop culture references because I think the zeitgeist is so accessible for people. There is always a reference point. And we have these parasocial relationships with these celebrities. So my favorite texts from clients are usually, "Oh my god, I just saw that video you did about like Justin Baldoni and oh my god, that's like actually what's happening for me," right? So you can draw your own parallels. So I try to keep it, in depth and consistent across both my platforms.
I think it's such a fun way to learn astrology and to kind of see it in action when we
Mhm.
are kind of like overlaying the cosmos onto the lives of these people that we watch in
Yeah.
that kind of like parasocial way. It's a fun way to see the astrology in action, and it's similar to I think what a lot of folks who are into astrology do with like their friend groups, but
Mhm.
that kind of like removal and that like entertainment aspect of it with folks who are like in the public eye can be really fun.
Oh my god, yeah. It's insane actually how people are so like I mean, I love pop culture, but then it's almost like the common language? Like there's someone's always going to know something. Like you might not know all the things, but I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't really know about the Blake and Baldoni of it all, at this moment in time too.
Yeah, if you're online,
Yes,
you're gonna have some
chronically
sense
online.
that something's going on. I hear you bring up Pluto too, and I
Mm,
love that you are like a strong Plutonian person. Like you said, Pluto on the ascendant. Your personal Instagram handle is Agent of Pluto. It seems like that's
mhm.
kind of like your business branding is Agent of Pluto, like as a individual.
It's so funny you say that because I've definitely been struggling and grappling with how to merge these identities, as a creative, but also as an astrologer, but also as someone who's just made this like really huge life pivot. So like it's almost like inception branding, if you will. How I kind of view it is, I, as a Scorpio rising, don't like to be known by my name specifically, which is Tasha. And so Agent of Pluto gives me a vessel. It's kind of like a double play a little bit, right? Because really the Agent of Pluto is Mars. So
Mhm.
really, there's like all these layers to the branding, but ultimately, yes, it is more personal because in my life, spirituality is like huge and I really want an outlet for pop culture. But when I started realizing that there was almost like demand for wow, this type of education hybrid. And it's funny because a lot of my clients actually do come from that realm who want to engage in deeper conversation. So it's, interesting how pop culture is now the bridge into some deeper spirituality work.
I think Plutonian figures like find each other because I don't know if you know my personal Instagram account because I have that same thing of like not wanting to go by my name.
Hmm.
I keep going. I'm like, should I change the Persephonic account to just be my name? I don't know. Ugh.
Hmm.
But my personal account on Instagram for the longest time has been Pluto's BFF forever.
Oh, cute. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well,
So
there we
when
go.
I saw your Agent of Pluto, I was like, wait a second, wait a
Hey,
second, and that's
Plutonic people do find each
we
other.
do, and that's because so my my chart ruler, Mars, is conjunct Pluto in Scorpio, so there's, like,
Mhm.
a lot of that, martial Plutonic energy, all it's in the 8th house too, like, it's all going on in
Mm.
there.
Powerful.
How would you describe and I'm looking at the cards that have come up for, like, your present work, and I'm keeping them
Mhm.
a little bit of a secret now in
Mm,
true
mm,
Platonic fashion, but how would you
totally.
describe, like, what your passion in life is right now?
Oh my gosh. I think my passion in life is to just push the limits of what a traditional business or life could be.
Mm.
I know that sounds maybe very vague and generic, but I've got a 10th house stellium, and for the longest time, I've kind of been grappling like, what does this really mean for me? Right. And ultimately, on some level, I just I get such a kick out of, "Oh my god, wait, I actually get to follow my joy. I actually get to create this random thing and start from nothing, almost like conceptualize and give birth," right? And that's like the artist's journey, if you will, but I
Mhm.
never had that luxury. Everything was always scripted, regimented. I went to Wellesley, I did the finance thing. Everything was bred for a certain level of excellence, but now I almost kind of feel like I'm maybe in God, sometimes see it's I've Chiron in my son, so it's hard to self-own sometimes. But I would like to hope that at the end of the day, people feel inspired to transform their lives and whenever they want to by virtue of doing what I'm doing. And if that means like I have to set an example by really leaning hard into trusting the process and pursuing that joy and knowing that you can make it out of, a total 180, like yeah, I want to be that person for people, whether I'm talking to you directly or whether it's like, wow, she left Wall Street, she gave that whole thing up, and then she tried to like really chase this and figure this out. And, she's doing it, right? And I think there's power in hope, especially in these times right now. So, yeah, I think ultimately I just hope to inspire.
Inspire, pursuing your passions, forging a new path, positioning yourself as someone who can be like an inspiration to others
Hmm.
to take that leap and to kind of chase that joy. I think
Yeah.
you said something similar to that.
Yeah.
All of
Yeah.
that is so reflected in these cards that have come up here. It's amazing. I'll say that they're both
Hmm.
wands. They're both in the suit of wands, and the
Very
amount
interesting.
of wands cards that have come up in every interview I've done for this show so far,
I love that for you, elementally.
it speaks so clearly to the fact that these people that I'm talking to, like you and my other guests, are you're true artists. Like, we care about living authentically, having, like, free self-expression, not following a preordained, like, clear-cut path in front of us. There's so much of, like, forging our own way, and that's the whole goal with this show is to give
Mhm.
folks real world examples of what that looks like. So for you here,
Mhm.
we have the Knight of Wands and the
Ooh.
King of Wands coming
Oh,
up
wow.
together. Really powerful combo here of like fire forging a path and
Mhm.
also being in like a leadership position. I I feel like there is some sense of when folks like yourself, when astrologers like yourself are
Mhm.
really putting themselves out there in a very public way, the way that you do with your pop culture
Mhm.
astrology commentating, there
Mhm.
is this kind of sense of being a thought leader in that
Mm.
genre, in the sense where
Mhm.
you have to determine for yourself what ethics you're going to be applying when you're doing this kind of work, what is newsworthy, what is like you're sort of building that throne and building that structure as you present this content in a way that is kind of forging like a new path forward. It's not, there's not a long storied history of combining astrology and movie stars. Like there's
Mhm.
some little bits here and there, but we are kind of in a new era of social media. There's so many celebrities. There's a lot of celebrities that you talk about that I've
Mhm.
never heard of because they're in, like, a certain genre of, like, reality
Totally.
TV that I don't watch. So it's
Yeah.
like you're kind of it's this brave new world, and it feels like you're forging a path forward there.
Trying desperately to. I mean, not so desperately. I just honestly, like I said, I think there's like a picture of me when I was like 3 or 4 with my dad, and I have like People magazine, like holding that up, right? So, and admittedly, pop culture was actually how I studied astrology. Because at first it was just like, and I still do maintain this. Like, I don't necessarily consider myself an expert on astrology. I don't think anyone's necessarily an expert because there's always something to learn, right? I mean, of course, there are masters of the craft, but I'm not in those leagues. I'm kind of just, okay, trusting a whole lot of what my intuition says, using a lot of the astrology. And this is why I also try not to have like too biased of an opinion. Like, it's helping me also cultivate a level of objectivity because what I'm more concerned about is the underlying meaning behind why something's happening. And sure, yes, it's cute to stay up, this is happening and we see that in this chart. But usually when it comes to more complicated matters, that's where I get a lot of joy, really digging and like asking the questions and using the astrology to kind of guide more ethical responses. I must admit, obviously I'm not going to shy away from some really harsh stuff we, hear about, like obviously Neil Gaiman comes to
Mm,
mind
yeah.
recently, and I remember getting some comments from people like, "What are you doing? It's like take this seriously, And it's kind of like, well, I am taking it seriously. You're not taking it seriously. I used astrology to help work through my sexual harassment at work, So for me, it helped reclaim my story. And if anything, with the way that like society works these days, like you can't really trust whatever people are saying, right? And so when I go to look at the chart, if there is a rumor or an accusation and I see things hitting, it's not to say like you're guilty or not, but I think it is very interesting that it just so happens that there is this activation in the chart. And you and I think are very firmly as within so without, as above so below. So what is this really
Mhm.
reflecting here?
Yeah, yeah, seeing those hints. I think when people say like, "How dare you relate astrology to this event that's happening?" It's them not seeing the purpose or the seriousness
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
astrology and the ways in which, especially when it comes to, say, like politics, a lot of my favorite astrologers really heavily
Hmm.
follow politics and apply those two together.
Hmm.
And I think it is so helpful and beneficial because it helps us to see those patterns that are repeating throughout history and can maybe give us
Mhm.
some kind of insight on like what the hell to do about it now.
Totally, totally. And I mean, look, this year, if anything, with Jupiter and Gemini, it kind of even, I think, blew that wide open, right? Because obviously there was a lot about the election and predictions. And I think every election cycle, astrologers naturally are going to go through this, right? It's like you're putting a whole lot of stake on the prediction. And
Mhm.
we all know it isn't a guarantee necessarily because bias is so rooted in your prediction. And you don't know these people directly. So, obviously we saw with Kamala, there was a lot of people predicting Kamala winning, right? But the reality is there are different ways to interpret a chart, which is why I said earlier it's like art interpretation. It is still very much storytelling.
Mhm.
And if that story resonates with you, amazing, because it's all about the stories we tell ourselves, right? But in the event when reality does not line up with your interpretation, I always say it's not astrology that's wrong, it's the astrologer who's wrong in our
Yeah.
inherent bias limitations. Mhm.
Exactly, exactly. I kind of give similar advice when I'm talking to folks about what decks they're working with or like when when
Mm,
when I'm teaching tarot, especially to like new students and talking about the different styles of decks, I always make sure to really emphasize the point that each deck and the art within that deck is absolutely filtered through the bias of the person who created it, the writer
mhm,
behind it, the artist behind it. Where, I for me, talking about tarot, I think that tarot is always reflecting like universal truth,
mhm,
but the actual imagery or the actual text in a book it's that truth filtered and distorted through the bias and context and experience of the person who made it. And I think it's very similar for astrology and the astrologers who are interpreting
mhm,
the cosmos and the positions of the planets and what they're doing.
mhm. Absolutely. It's a tool at the end of the day, not
Yeah.
the final say. Mhm,
Exactly, exactly.
mhm.
total side note, but there was a TikTok that I think that I stumbled upon Paris Hilton's exact birth time.
Oh my gosh.
So online, her birth time is shown as I forget what like the exact rating is. So for
Mhm.
non-astrologers, when you find birth charts online, there's websites that kind of like categorize and
Mhm.
catalog people's birth charts and namely public figures, and there will be different ratings for how likely a birth time is to be 100% accurate. So, if it came directly from someone's birth certificate, that's a pretty good sign, but others are like,
Mhm.
"Oh, it was a rumor." So there's different ways to rate that. And Paris Hilton's chart online says that it's pretty sure that it's a very good rectification. Like some astrologers went
Mhm.
in and rectified, meaning they guessed at her birth time based on events in her life and knowing like the date of her birth. So I stumbled upon a TikTok one time where someone was like, "Yeah, I went to a yard sale at Kathy Hilton's house and they were
Oh my god,
selling the most
amazing.
random things. And one of the things that they got was like a baby book that had probably been, like, given to the family by, like, Paris's aunt, like, it wasn't, like, the baby book that they really
Oh my
used,
god. Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's her
yeah.
baby book, and it has, like, her weight and the birthday and the birth time, and it
Gold.
was very
Gold.
close to the rectified one, so I just screenshotted it because I was like, "Who do I tell this
Yes.
to? How do
Me.
1-800 astrologers?" So I will
Honestly, oh
send
my
that
god,
to you.
that should be a hotline, like, any info you have, please phone that in, like, I
Yeah.
appreciate that
It
1,000%.
was really close to the rectified time, it was maybe within, like, half an hour, still the same, like,
That's
ascendant
sick.
sign, rising sign,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm gonna send that to you because 'cause I'm like, I don't know who I was like my first thought was like, "How do I tell Chris Brennan about this?"
Tweet at him, he's so like or get it to
He's so
Camille.
chronically online.
He's what, an Aquarius, rising? Because he's a Scorpio stellium, right?
Yeah, big
So
Scorpio stellium, but I think
yeah, yeah,
Aquarius
yeah.
rising.
Aquarius rising. So, all the Aquarius energy, all the air sign energy is very chronically
All
online.
the information, we need it all. Amazing. So, when did you start studying astrology? When did it kind of, like, come onto your radar?
Oh my gosh. My mom is also a Cancer, and so like for all my life, I would hear, "Oh, we're Cancers. We like to stay at home and watch TV," which is like fair. I still do that, but I only really started taking it seriously after I had gotten like sexually harassed at work, and it was this was December 2019, and COVID then hit obviously shortly after.
Mm.
And I was kind of aimless at home. And I found an aura reader who then introduced me basically to Pooja, the astrologer, who literally read me. And it was like, oh my God, what? My life is changing. Like it just felt like there was a moment where the light bulb switched. And after that point, it was like, oh my God, I'm so interested. I literally would spend every obsessive moment self studying,
Mhm.
and basically in 2022, so this was like about 2 years later, I kind of started, I think, getting annoyed because I would hear certain things and people were saying things that I'm like, that's a weird way of interpreting it. Or, interesting. And it wasn't that these people were interpreting it wrong, right? It was, again, a different interpretation that I was like, I don't really care for that interpretation. Um, but I like how to approach it this way, maybe. And so I started kind of, being like, okay, maybe let me focus on evolutionary astrology because it's not bad or good, right? It's like trying to teach you that framework. So I would say it's been a 2.5 year intensive study up until deciding, you know what, I'm going to take the jump and jump. And through that, I actually did end up going to the Forest Center for Evolutionary Astrology for a few years. I just left, actually. I haven't finished the program, but I'm also about to start some like psychological astrology courses too. So it's, never ending, right? Never
That's
ending.
amazing. Oh, yeah, absolutely, like, a lifelong study. There's so much in the field of astrology. How would you define evolutionary astrology for those who aren't familiar?
So, I think the main branches of modern astrology, or, astrology in the West, I should say, are Hellenistic, which is traditional, one that you would see Chris Brennan practice on the astrology podcast. But then you'd also have
I'm
modern
definitely more of a
astrology.
Hellenistic astrologer myself.
Yeah, I love Hellenistic, and I actually think like conditioning the flavor of planets like tells you a lot more about your circumstance. So while I don't prescribe to or subscribe to oh that's a bad placement or a good placement, I honor the difficulty or your experience and I want to give it that consideration. So I do love that aspect of Hellenistic. But then there's the other side, right, where it's quote unquote modern, where it's like more psychologically inclined. But then there's also evolutionary, which takes a lot of that modern philosophy, but then you're now adding in metaphysics. So you're adding past lives and karma and the idea that the soul here has a purpose and the nodes tell you how to get there kind of and
Mhm.
actualize that purpose. So there's a little more free will, there's a little more agency in co-creating with source.
I think where astrology is maybe going in the modern sense is this really cool
Mhm.
blend of modern, more like psychological astrology, the evolutionary understanding of the nodes and the potential for past lives. And I think there's a really cool blending now with some of these elements of Hellenistic astrology now that that's
Mhm.
become a much more
Yes.
um, common or like popular entry point. Because I feel like
Yeah.
for our age group or anyone older than us that
Mhm.
was like modern astrology, psychological astrology was kind of like the only option, and then Hellenistic astrology has kind of like come up from behind. It was like a sleeper in this
Led
race,
by
and
Chris Brennan.
led by I need like a patron saint candle to Chris Brennan. It's kind of
Someone should
embarrassing.
create Austin Coffick should make that.
Oh my god. I have such a parasocial relationship with mostly the boys on the
Yeah.
astrology podcast. Truly big fans of them, but they've done such good work of bringing this more
Mhm.
ancient style of astrology to the forefront, and it's such a fun blending because when I'm doing tarot, I'm doing it from really a very evolutionary perspective, a really more like modern psychological perspective. Everything's
Mhm.
neutral, there's no good, there's no bad. But then I love the cut and dryness of
Mhm.
some of Hellenistic astrology. And
Yes.
as we live it and experience it, we see that not everything is so cut and dry. Like, for example, before we started
Mhm.
recording, I told Tasha that today is the final exact conjunction of my Saturn return. So, transiting Saturn is at the exact degree and minute of my natal Saturn. And
Amazing.
in Hellenistic astrology, I Saturn is not on my sect. Saturn is not on my team. I have a night chart, so Saturn
Mm.
should be really, really difficult for me. And I have Saturn in the 12th house, and I have Saturn in a sign that it's not particularly happy in. So
But it likes being in the 12th.
that's true. That's true. Saturn does like being the 12th. So maybe that's some of where it's on paper, maybe should have had a really, really rough Saturn return. And
Mm.
I did. I mean, I cried a lot when Saturn was stationing retrograde on the degree of my natal Saturn this past summer.
Yeah.
That sucked for a little bit, but like no one died. I still have all my limbs and my health and it could have been a lot worse. So
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
balancing that like kind of harshness that Hellenistic astrology can have with some of that more modern psychological, like, yeah, I'm just coming into myself as an authority in the spiritual Piscean realms.
I mean, it is really interesting, because I'm a Sag moon. At the end of the day, like, if
Mm.
you don't feel hopeful after we've had a conversation about your life, like, I have actually done something wrong. And
Yeah,
admittedly, I probably have done a lot of things wrong because I get emails from clients like 6 months later, wasn't prepared to hear what you had to say. And now it's like all come true and it's real. And I'm like, yes, but there's hope now that you know
Pluto of
what's
it
gonna
all.
happen. Yeah, like here's the thing. It's Pluto is actually kind, even though the reputation might precede it, but it is only giving you what you are barely ready for. But you're like ready for it, you know? So even if it feels like, oh my God, everything's like getting ripped apart for me, okay, I am actually ready to handle this as part.
Yeah.
Like you're ready, you know? You know who has a night chart? Blake Lively. And who's
Oh,
having a real rough go at it right now? Also Blake Lively.
yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
it's interesting. It's just interesting to see how condition affects your life. It doesn't necessarily mean one or the other, but it just shows you what you're working with, really.
Exactly, exactly. And
Mhm.
do you feel like you have to try really hard to help clients like not go into catastrophizing, or is that with that Sag moon, is that just kind of part of you of like being a little bit more optimistic?
Mm, sometimes to my detriment. Here's the thing. I have very intense conversations, of course. You know, I've had conversations about death and grief and I would like to think that I am a vessel for the universe, hence why I call myself the agent of Pluto, right? On the personal, because
Mhm,
maybe there are some like I believe if I've come into contact with you, there was a message or something that we needed to share with each other. And so you know, it's kind of one of those things where, okay, we're going to like sit with it and we're going to like really be with it. And my thing is always validating how you feel about something. It
mhm,
doesn't like, even if it's petty as hell, okay, like I don't care. I don't care. Like it's important that goes somewhere to feel it and then really understand it. So I leave space for both for you to wallow a little bit, but then at a certain point, it's kind of like, okay, let's talk about how we don't want to make ourselves wallow anymore because that's actually going to be what's helpful now that you've like really felt it, you know? So I guess the Sag Moon is hopeful in that you'd want to sit with these conversations with a friend who likes to talk about pop culture, okay? But
mhm.
then we can get really deep as well. So that's kind of the idea behind why I do what I do, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, I think when I'm working with clients, there's a lot of like, let's accept what is. Let's
Mhm.
accept the reality that's in front of us, even if it feels bad and sucks. And now, what can we do now that we know what is? What can we do
Mhm.
about that?
Mhm. Yeah,
So, I've heard
absolutely.
you mention a couple times some sexual harassment that you've
Oh,
experienced,
yes.
and I'm so sorry that God, it's like just the plight of women, I don't
Woman.
wanna say, but,
Well, you
like
know what? I wanna say men I'm gonna do a
mm,
shout out to men too, because I
yeah.
think that there is a fundamental masculine wounding in the environment, and it's not just men, right? Masculine belongs in all of us, and the idea that, like, I can only imagine that there are also a lot of men who have internalized sexual abuse or some sort of harassment, but never knowing what to do with it and having to sit with it. Oh my god, that is brutal. So I give all my love to the ladies, but also I want to shout out men who don't have that access and emotional support, and that is so caustic for their soul.
Oh my gosh, yes, a really, really good point. Thank you for making that. And it sounds like was that in your work as a Wall Street analyst? Was that where
Mhm.
that kind of happened?
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, I've been let's see. I started out in investment banking right out of college, and I spent basically close to a decade, so nine, a little over 9 years in the industry, and it's so interesting. It took me all the way to the last gig I had in the industry to actively decide, oh my God, yeah, actually going to report this to HR.
Mm,
Because up until that point, it was very much internalized. It was very much, let me just keep it and not say a thing. But it was still uncomfortable. And I remember an instance even early on in my investment banking career where like I got really hammered at a Christmas party, which again, you should be able to get hammered at a Christmas party. Like
as
that's
one
fine.
does.
As one does, but you know, I get it. It's not professional, but whatever. I was an overworked analyst. But instead of feeling protected, like I had people who were in my corner. My staffer literally like took me home and nothing happened. And he was such a great guy. But then there was another situation where like an MD or a VP or whatever was like actively trying to hit on me while I was so drunk. But everyone, here's the kicker, everyone could see I was so drunk, but no one would want to step in but then they would
Mm.
make fun of it after, right? So there is all this added shame that gets built on, and then you wonder if it's safe to say anything. And so this is why I think I also feel really passionately about if there is an accusation out and no one's nailed a person yet, or oh, let's hear all sides or whatever. I'm like, sure, I'll throw my side in. And if I feel like there is actively something hitting and I can see the shadow vibration of it manifesting in this manner, I will call it out or at least leave the imprint there for you to make a judgment on.
Interesting to see kind of what further comes to light with the Venus retrograde that's coming up, because so much
Mhm.
so much of this that we're talking about is that gendered power dynamics, the ways in which anyone who was not just like a straight man has
Mhm.
this disadvantage in our society, and Venus often like reflects that, and the way these like
Mhm.
scandals kind of come out in that Venus retrograde.
I'm so glad you brought it up too, because obviously there's a lot about Chiron in this
Mhm.
conversation in Aries. And, we are headed into an eclipse season with a whole lot of Aries activation. And Chiron, no doubt, is a part of this story. And, when Chiron had first moved into Aries, that was like 2018, which was really when Me Too started picking up, right? The idea of
Mhm.
Chiron wounding in Aries identity, me too, I matter too. But then you hear that echo of that, right? In Mark Zuckerberg, LOL, Mars in Scorpio, Venus in Taurus, right? So very empowered across both Venus and Mars. And for him
Mm.
to be talking about this idea of the masculine being wounded, right? Like again, I
Yeah.
can divorce the fact that Mark Zuckerberg is the one saying it, but I can understand where it might be difficult for men to actually reclaim or express themselves also as a consequence of that. Not to say that it's our problem to like solve for them, but it's a general problem I think collectively we all have to pick up for each other, both women and men.
Yeah, that difficulty in being able to, like, name and express the ways in which the construct of masculinity and patriarchy has done so much damage to men in our society. Yeah, that also
Mhm.
feels so like it's an interesting conversation that's come up, like, during Mars retrograde in Cancer, because it also feels
Mhm.
like, okay, when Mars is kind of forced into the emotional waters and has to actually confront how some of its maybe aggression and insistence on action and domination has actually, like, harmed itself at the end of the day. It's
Mhm.
really interesting.
Mhm.
Interesting conversations.
Totally. Totally. Because it's Black History Month, I feel like the recommendation everyone should definitely reread or pick up Bell Hook's All About Love,
Mm.
because I do think that it is such a beautiful exploration of how we can even like address what we're talking about, holding space for each other, not just, oh, he can't meet my needs, right? But like, let's like unpack on some deeper level, like what's happening here.
Yeah, how can we have reciprocal relationships? How
Says
can we
the
get there?
Libra, says the Libra.
Says the Libra. Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm still so curious of this well, let me bring up the cards that have come up here, because I'm
Oh,
seeing such an interesting, like, mirroring. 'Cause as soon as we started talking about some of the analyst work, I was like, "Let me just see what's here." And
right.
reminder that our present cards for you presently, we are deep in the fire. Knight of Wands, King of Wands. We are like in our creativity, in our passion, in our exploration, in our like creative solar plexus fire.
Love that. I'm a generator, so love that.
Hey, me too, generator. And
Yeah.
then coming from Two Pentacles. We've got the Nine of Pentacles and the King of Pentacles here. So
Threw away
coming
all that wealth. I'm just kidding.
through it all that well, you said Wall Street? Nah, I'm gonna freelance as like an
Oh my
artist,
goodness.
basically. So I can almost like see in these two cards in particular
Mhm.
how like stuck and isolated I feel like you felt at least at the end of that career in Wall Street. Does
Mhm.
that does is that accurate to your experience?
Totally, because that also coincided with my Saturn return. Like,
Uh-huh.
obviously, becoming an astrologer during my Saturn return, can I be more, cliche, right?
What sign is
But
your Saturn in?
Aquarius, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go, and it's opposing my sun, so there was a very big identity reckoning,
Mm.
correcting, I should say. Yes, I was very depressed. I literally remember having a conversation with my friend who is a Pisces and Taurus rising, or we're not really like friends like that anymore. We're acquaintances now, but I'd said, I think I'm so depressed by everyone I'm hanging out with.
Mm.
She's like, sounds like you need to go to a therapist. And we're like having martinis at a New York bar. And, I'm Pluto my ascendant. I like to self therapize. And I have tried the therapy route, but I fired all my therapists because I'm like, let me self therapize you instead. Like, it just doesn't work for me in that way. I remember thinking, no, I think I just need new friends. And
Mm.
this is not it. It wasn't like I was navigating a lot of grief and trauma. Like, I lost my dad in college. And so a lot of
Mm.
choices were rooted in like independence and let me just do my own thing and break free. But at that moment, it was very abundantly clear, like, I have a very stable salary. It's pretty good. I get to live in New York as like at this age. Like, I felt very lucky, but at the same time, just so deeply unhappy. And it was like, okay, how much money really every year? Like, oh, I'll stay for the bonus, but what's the quantifiable number that I'm trying to reach? I could not tell you in words. Like, I still don't ever have quantifiable money numbers for me. It's not about money in that way, even though, of course, money is so nice. But it really is about what is inspiring me to live and wake up like every day wanting to like literally live. And before it was to serve other people, but that left me feeling really resentful because it was service out of lack rather than service out of care. So
Mm.
there was a whole lot of that going on for me. Hmm.
I feel like you just so accurately described this transition from the King of Pentacles to the King of Wands.
Mm.
The King of Pentacles is like, it's all about the finances and the material and making sure that, the ducks are in a row and all of the details are managed. And then the King of Wands is so much more in a position of being able to like express and wanting to
Mm.
just do what is exciting and do what is inspiring. And then
Mhm.
also hearing you basically describe yourself as the figure in the Nine of Pentacles of like you're in the garden, you've got the earthly
Mm.
delights, you've got the solid steady income and all of the trappings that should equal a happy,
Mhm.
fulfilled life, but there's so much that's being sacrificed, so much of yourself that's being sacrificed in order to have those things that
Mhm.
you had to kind of break free and run forward as that Knight of Wands. Like, wait a second, I'm gonna get out of here. Let me hop on this horse. I am inspired and I'm just gonna run with it.
Honestly, I must say, if I were to die tomorrow or whatever, I've always been the sort of person to be like, I would hope that there would be no regrets, like I did. And even if I did climb and accomplish the mountain, right? Like, to me, that's not, I mean, yes, it would be great, obviously. But if, again, I were to die tomorrow, it would feel like, wow, okay, I actually did make an effort. I tried. I did everything I possibly could to try to make this happen. And even if it was successful or not, like, I owed it to myself so much and I honored myself in such a way that I felt like, I don't know. To me, then the SAG moon kicks in. It's like, okay, then how can the universe like bet against this? That just feels like
I'm
such
winning.
a, yeah, it just felt like such an authentic moment of, no, okay, no, I'm here to learn and create. And I'm going to just keep doing that in whatever shape or form it comes through. And I trust that it's going to be supported. And if it isn't, then, well, that's not the thing, but I'll still keep creating anyway.
Yeah. What do you think, like skills wise, experience
Mhm.
wise, what have you brought with you from kind of your past life into this new version of Tasha, this new professional life?
Mm. It's so interesting, right? Because when you were asking me, like, what does my day to day look like now? And it's like, oh, yeah, I do retreats also, right? Like that, my mind goes to that very immediately because I used to be the friend that would plan the group parties. the bachelorettes, the everything. And that was kind of what I was alluding to earlier about at some point feeling resentful for offering up so much of your energy and service for other people. Like I wasn't like it made me happy to see other people happy, but it wasn't again coming from a place of like this is what I want to do. It was more of a I feel like I have to do this for you. But in doing so all these years, it got me very good at organizing and hosting and understanding like curation, you know? And
Mm.
so for me also there was a lot of marketing in what I used to do from a finance perspective, which isn't that exciting, but you know, the idea of like what materials do I need? What flyers do I need? Do I need a deck for this? Do I need business card? Like there was just a natural programming that kind of went into it, right? So like, okay, I want to build this logo. I want to build that. I want to that came second nature to me. And I think a fearlessness maybe around I'm just gonna go for it, you know? Like people always say like, "Wow, you seem to get all these opportunities." And it's like, I'm very thankful for them, of course, but there is also a lot of effort that does go behind trying to put you in a position. And I think that work ethic I learned in my time in finance and also like how to really like perfect things to a certain point. Now, will they be always received? No, but can I feel good about what I put out? Absolutely.
Yeah, there is so much work that goes into getting yourself in a position to be able to receive those opportunities when they come to
Mhm.
you, to be visible enough for folks to see you for an opportunity. There's so much
Mhm.
work that goes into that that I think a lot of times people don't necessarily understand if they haven't done it
Mhm.
before, if they're trying to get into
Mhm.
freelancing, trying to get into some kind of entrepreneurship, that
Yeah.
there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. You don't just put up one post and fill your retreat, right?
Right, right. And honestly, there's a lot of trust, right? I know there's a lot of conversation about algorithm and oh my god, the algorithm's not reaching its people.
Mhm.
And on some level, you know, I can get on board with that, but then the Pluto in me always gets interesting. Whenever it is not me. Whenever it's not like, oh my god, I don't know why this is happening to me. It's like, ooh, let's dig in a little deeper. For me, I'm not the most popular or followed. I mean, I do have Saturn in my third, you know, in Aquarius from a Placidus perspective. So I acknowledge that there it will be a minute before the virality or the popping off, right? And I'm okay with that, you know, and that's what I think is important to note, right? Like Saturn is also not to say just the tough daddy, but it's a great harvest master at the end of the day. So if you are committed to something and are disciplined to do something, Saturn will reward, you know, but ultimately it's helpful if you enjoy the process. Very Virgo.
Yeah, and there's something to be said, for the non-astrologers, the 3rd house, one of the associations for the 3rd house is, like, your neighborhood, your immediate community, your
Yeah.
communication, how your communication is being received, and
Mhm.
there's something to be said about having Saturn there and that, like, pruning and not it's not blowing up and communicating to everyone at once because not everyone is going to receive that message in the way you want them to receive it. So having
Yeah.
some boundaries and some limitations there,
Mhm.
Saturn plays the long game. In the long run,
Mhm.
that's going to be more beneficial to you than going viral every single time and having 75 to 80% of the people who are seeing your communications not agree, not like you, send you negativity.
Mhm. Totally. You know, it had to even like come to a very spiritual place around this with trolls in the comments. Of
Mm,
course, I'm sure you experienced this too. I mean, the fact that I'm doing pop culture and astrology, right? Like literally both two things very easy to shit on by like
yeah.
a random troll online. So like, oh God. But I had to kind of take a step back and think, wow, a lot of these comments feel like really terrible things my subconscious would say to me to
Mm.
not want me to do something. So how what is my relationship with this, right? Because do I really identify with what they're saying? If I do, all right, what's the trigger here? But if I
Yeah.
don't, thank you for your engagement because that is going to help me out so freaking much.
You're that bitch when you cause all this conversation. I have quoted Beyoncé
Mhm.
on that line multiple times this week. Yeah,
Hey,
no, that is such
man.
a great point. If you are taking on, if you're resonating and accepting what it is that the trolls are saying to you, that says a lot about you and what you need to
Mhm.
work on, or
Mhm.
myself in my case and what I need to work on. So where do you see the last part of this reading, looking forward to the
Mhm.
future, I've been calling it some predictive imagination, because there's so
Mm.
much right now. I feel like every 45 seconds there's another breaking news alert about some horrible thing that is happening in our country,
Mhm.
and it's so easy to start imagining worst case scenarios. Oh shit. Okay.
Do you like how Mercury Pisces was like, we're not going to talk about the worst case scenario, okay?
Not. Exactly, and we're not. So what are I like to give us a moment to
Mhm.
be able to imagine some really good things happening in the future, the best case scenario. So what are you hoping for your work moving forward? Are you
Mhm.
looking at another retreat, more retreats? I know
Yeah.
you actually just finished a podcast, right? You just kind of concluded a
Yes.
podcast.
Yes, that chapter. It has,
So what's
it's
next?
so interesting because I feel like the greatest teacher for me is experiencing the astrology and understanding like what that means to you, because it's more likely going to mean something to other people as well. And for me, I felt this Mars retrograde because it was happening in my ninth house. And I'm a Cancer Sun and South Node. So Mars going over both and stationing on my South Node really wiped the slate clean. So, as you said, I wound a podcast down. I stopped my writing gigs, effectively kind of flipping the table on my creativity and like giving myself an opportunity to put the puzzle together in a different way with the existing pieces. And I would actually shout that out as a um keynote, or if you're like wondering like, oh my god, how am I going to work with this energy, it's like gearing up to go ahead, and what do I do with it? It's like, well, you have the pieces already, but you get to dream bigger than before. So for me, I am about to launch a YouTube channel where I'm going to be doing more deep dives
Yay.
astrologically, in a way that short form can't really contain. And then I'm
Mhm.
also going to be coming back with another podcast, this time with a high school bestie of mine. And this is a project that we've been trying to get together for a couple of years now, but then now it feels like the time is right. I'm definitely also going to be doing a couple of retreats next year as well, and just continuing my client work. So, that's imminently in my future, which sounds a lot, but I'm excited. And I think if I were to imagine and envision something more, I love all the things I get to do now. I think moving forward, I would just love to have maybe a bigger platform where people can,
Mhm.
hear the gospel of pop astrology. Just kidding. But I don't know, just to kind of be more of a force, like whether that's like a columnist at a magazine, showing up on e-news or whatever, right? But just being a real force in actually making folks take both pop culture and astrology seriously.
Yeah, yeah. I would do I even wanna ask this
You
question?
do.
Are you worried about any backlash against astrology as the pendulum of kind of society and culture is starting to swing towards conservatism?
Always, always. But this is why I believe, like, it's really important to understand like what astrology means to you. And this is kind
Mhm.
of the way I always broach conversation with people about feelings, right? It's not about like this third entity or whatever. It's how I'm feeling about this. And I want to share how this makes me feel with you with no pretense or desire to superimpose it onto you. And so, actually, my favorite conversations are on when I get asked on podcasts, so how does religion factor into this? Or like, what do you say to the
Oh, yeah.
naysayers, and I like it. I like it because I know what astrology has done for my life. And admittedly, I'm not trying to prove anything to you. But my favorite way to approach it is always, we all believe in energy. Energy, we all learn energy in physics in high school. So we all agree on some common base denominator, right? And we all have heard, oh my God, the vibes were off. good vibe, bad vibe, high vibe, low vibe. We all use this terminology so interchangeably in our everyday. So if the way I'm looking at astrology is this is a language. It's not really a belief system to me. It's not really a whatever type of practice,
Mhm.
but it's a language that I'm using to help identify energy. Imagine if you could identify just exactly why that person pissed you off, energetically speaking, the moment you walk into a room. You can identify that. And I think that's very powerful. And then if I think about the conservative religious aspect, well, ho, good thing there's a house for religion in astrology, so we can get into all of that. And I actually credit astrology with helping me kind of find my faith, regain my faith, even
Mm,
in Islam. Okay, so raised
yeah.
Muslim. Okay, I'm all tatted up. For the longest time, felt like I was the baddest Muslim in the world, not in the good way, and ultimately kind of arrived at it again feeling empowered. Like, I like my spirituality, I like certain pillars of what it has to say, but I'm not prescribing to an institutionalized religion because I don't really believe in that.
Mm,
So I believe in the essence of it. So then if you're talking about faith, we can have a whole conversation, because what I then believe astrology is doing is helping you, it's giving you another tool or a reference point to help you arrive at that faith. It works together. It's not to be separated. And usually people are into it. But if they're not, then those are not my people. But ultimately, when the tide could turn, it's just going to be, I think, a little more like people are going to have to be a little more careful around who they would want to converse with, right? Discernment is also really important
yeah.
at that point.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
I'm always preaching about discernment.
Mm.
Yes. Gosh, and that connection to religion, spoken like a true Sagittarius moon for sure. I fully agree with you that my entry into, or my experience with spirituality, with working with tarot, and then almost in particular my experience with astrology has brought me closer to a sense of religiosity,
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
the experience of religion. I was not someone who was really raised in a religion, but now like I'll 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 pray these
Yeah.
days. Like I'll
Yeah.
pray to, and like I'll pray to a planet, and like
Mhm.
there's this relationship where those, astrology does not have to be practiced in this way, but I
Mhm.
do consider now some of my spirituality to start leaning a little more towards religiosity,
Yeah, yeah.
um, in a way that is, like you said, not ascribing to any kind of anyone else's rules or structure for what that should look like,
Mhm.
but bringing in that essence in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I have like my Cancer is in my ninth house, right, of beliefs and religion, and Saturn the third of perception and identification. So for me, it is a whole lot around identifying certain ideas that I really like or concepts, and kind of identifying with those and disidentifying with other things that don't serve me. So, you know, ultimately kind of choose your own adventure. Right? And I think that's kind of
Yes.
like the beauty of it. It's there are no set rules on how you work with the planets. It's choose your own adventure. So why not choose your own adventure about everything else? Like, I think it just helps break the matrix up in such a way that, yeah, there is possibility. Like, I wouldn't like to think things were random all the time, because that just feels so cruel. And I know intentionality behind stuff is also seemingly cruel right now with the way that the world is, but we are in currently a rebirth of a new world order, and in very Plutonic fashion, things have to literally burn to the ground. Or if you, here's the thing, if they are not getting burned to the ground, you would have had to willingly show them the exit before, right? And so for a lot of people, that's difficult. And if you think about where we are as a country, there were a lot of things that were probably needed correcting a lot sooner, that we kind of were very complacent on and continuously were complacent around, until now it's like the house is on fire. But I still have hope, Sag Moon, that there is a sense of an implosion, but people are going to use disaster as a way to rebuild community. And we already see it happen with, you know, South Carolina or North Carolina, with LA, right? It's community that is helping bring people together, bring people support. It is not by any means the federal government or whatever powers that be that are supposed to take care of the people, right? So when people say power to the people, it's like recognizing that there is a period of this transition where we are looking to rebuild community and that sense of it. Because we've also been so isolated with COVID over the last few years, right? And it's kind of
Mhm.
learning how to find the sense of belonging in the communities that feel good to you, that whatever your cause is, right? There's so many to pick from right now because everything is on the line. But what I do know is that we can't solve all of it without each other, and we have to all play that part.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I hear that. And necessity is the mother of invention. So as
Hmm.
things are getting bad and scary, and it is necessary for us to figure out ways of surviving and thriving and keeping each other safe, that is unfortunate and awful that things are conspiring and people are conspiring to create that need,
Hmm.
but hopefully we can find some innovative for
Hmm.
Pluto and Aquarius,
For sure.
like innovative and new ways of bringing community together.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
So hearing you talk about what you kind of have in mind for the future,
Hmm.
starting new podcasts, hosting more retreats, doing more client work, it just kind of seems like it's like boots on the ground, and we're a big like push, like a
Hmm.
push of just keeping at it, just keeping the practice going. And I
Yeah.
really see that. Yeah. The light has shifted. It's so bright in here now. So
Wow.
the
I love
8
that for
of
me.
Pentacles. Yes, we've got all the light in here. So the 8 of Pentacles coming up, showing that like you're ready to hone your craft. Like you're gonna just keep studying, keep practicing, keep doing these things that you've been doing, and kind of the things that maybe got you out of. There's almost this sense of like, okay, there was this big fiery push to get out of Wall Street.
Hmm.
I'm sure that was like kind of a hurdle that had to be kind of a scary hurdle that had to be like initially jumped over, like that big fool type leap. So we
Totally.
have all this fire in the center, but you're kind of getting back into, because remember the two past cards were our
Hmm.
Pentacles cards,
Hmm.
but now in the future, we've got Pentacles back again. So getting back into like that rhythm, that routine of like, yeah, this is the work now. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
But
Oh.
don't get too complacent, because we also have the Wheel of Fortune coming up for
Oh,
you moving
hey.
forward. So
Mm.
changes. I love this card. And there's so much astrology in the Wheel of Fortune, right?
Yeah.
So we have like the four, for folks who are not watching on the video or who are unfamiliar with the Wheel of Fortune card, there is this traditionally in the Pamela Coleman Smith drawing, which is what I'm looking at here. There's kind of a wheel in the center. There's all these like kind of esoteric like sigils and glyphs and different figures around the wheel. But in each corner of this card, there is a winged either animal or person, and we can connect them to something in the Bible. There's something in the Bible about it's like John and
Someone. I know.
four people who I think wrote something in the Bible. I There's so much
Mhm.
Christian imagery in the tarot, but I'm not super familiar with it. But we can also connect these four to the four fixed signs in astrology. So we have the angel, the person with wings would be
Mhm.
Aquarius. We have a bull, and that's going to be Taurus. We have the lion, which is Leo, right? Leo's
Mhm.
the fixed
Yes,
fire. And then we
indeed.
have the the phoenix. So then we
Mm.
have Scorpio.
Escorpio.
So There's the 4 fixed signs here, which it's interesting that's the fixed signs that are on the Wheel of Fortune, right? Because the fixed signs are like, we want to keep things the same. Like we're doing the work, but we kind of want to keep things the same,
Mm-hmm.
yet things are going to change regardless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, fixed signs are so powerful, like really. I as a Scorpio rising, I'm very biased about it. But there is so much power in sort of that inertia, you're trying to keep the momentum going, that even
Mm,
if you don't like to change, but it's the idea that when the change happens, it's consequential, or it
yeah.
feels consequential in a way. Not to say like, the cardinal signs changing, but like, they're initiators, right? So like change actually comes more second nature in a way. And with mutability, right? It's like I'm mutable, so I'm being forced to change, even though maybe I have to cultivate a better relationship with it. But it's kind of both baked in, except for fixed. And so to me, one of the beautiful things about astrology that I've recently kind of started to come into from personal understanding is, if there is a weakness, quote unquote, baked into the sign or the placement or whatever, there is a greater gift on the other side when you actually integrate it. And
Yes.
so if I think about change and fixed signs, if you are able to integrate that, that is damn, like you are unstoppable, honestly, because there is always the ability to regenerate and then maintain. That's powerful.
Mm, yes. Yes. Oh, I love that. That ability to maintain, and then also that endurance. I think you used the word endurance, and
Hmm.
having to endure. Like it's difficult to be a fixed sign in this crazy, crazy world right
This
now where things are
economy.
changing every second. In this economy, a fixed sign in this economy?
No, thank you.
Oh my God. But the lesson with the Wheel of Fortune, what I've always kind of been taught and what I've grown to learn about this card is that the the way to weather all of that change, the way to weather the changing of the wheel, the turning of the wheel, is to really turn inward and to find your center and to get really solid. It's like lowering that center of gravity helps you to like not be pushed over, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Getting like really grounded and centered. And I think that's something that the fixed signs are so good at, is like knowing who they are, knowing what their values are, knowing what's important to them, and like grasping onto that for dear life. And so holding on to that while everything is shifting and changing can at the end of the day kind of help you weather that a little better.
Yeah, I always think about transits and changes. Like I always say activated, right? Lindsay Hubbard Summer House. But like
Mm,
I genuinely feel, transits are like the best proof or living proof. It's like the test. Like how well have I actually like been living in accordance with like my values and my truth, right? Like, and then a transit hits, and then all of a sudden everything's like, oh my God, terrible, 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 terrible. But the reality is we were holding on and we were attaching ourselves to a set of values or shoulds that had no business being here. And it's hard to
mm,
let that go. It really is, because on some level you then have to own your accountability as part of this prolonged suffering. And it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like my sag moon's like, it's okay. Everything is a lesson. And you'd be really surprised, right? When you like talk to people and you're like, it's okay to make a bad choice. Like it really is. The freedom to make a bad choice is your right, and you should claim that right in your own lessons, like, and so fixed signs, I think, fear that a lot. If I think about Scorpio as factoring right into the fixed sign equation, that self ownership of your victim narrative is so big, but some
mm.
people might not necessarily want to go there. Hashtag Taurus, hashtag Leo sometimes, right? It's either hidden or like in other people.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So, my final question for you, Tasha, something that I've noticed for myself doing, I've done some like natal chart readings with
Yeah,
clients,
yeah.
and then working with clients with tarot. I noticed that particular types of folks are drawn to particular astrologers. So, if
Mhm.
someone is thinking about getting a reading with you, what are some of the maybe placements or
Mhm.
signatures in the chart that you notice are kind of signatures of your clients?
Ah, very Plutonic people, naturally.
Yeah.
Um, which means, if you've got a strong Pluto signature, Pluto is like aspecting, your ascendant, sun, moon. Those are generally chats I frequent in. But otherwise, I feel like I'm sure you see this too, right? Like clients have a lot of resonance with your own chart, even. So, I'm a Cancer sun, Scorpio rising, Sag moon. But I've also got Leo and Virgo, right? So for me, I always sort of pick up on what the energy field is telling me. I'm definitely, again, a girly for deeper conversation. We're not just going to have a natal chart reading. Like, it's not in my nature to just tell you, like, this is your sun, moon, rising. I have like a channeled story when I talk to you. Same with everyone else. But
Mm.
I just want to be upfront, if you are looking for like the basic, like, sun, moon, rising stuff, I'm not really that person for you. But and here's the thing, you don't have to know astrology to even have a conversation with me. But again, what
Hmm.
I'm offering is more intuitive spiritual astrology, um, which might not be for everyone, but for those who are inclined, water sign inclined, could be interesting.
Amazing. And where can folks find
Oh
you?
my gosh, yes. So I am on Instagram at the Pop Astrologist. I will also have a YouTube channel launching this month, if I can get my life together and Mars can get its act together. So those are two avenues that you can find me through, and you're always welcome to book a session via my Pop Astrologist page. I have my link up, my Calendly up as well. And if you are a listener of the pod, you should just put past, present, future cast in the show notes, and you get a $40 off your soul session reading as well.
Ooh, that's amazing. I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So check the show notes here because I will retroactively put that YouTube channel in. So once
Fabulous.
once that's up, that will be there. If you're listening in the future times, don't tell us how it is. I don't want to know. I'm not ready for that yet.
It'll be good.
Oh my
It'll be
gosh, but
good.
Tasha, yes, I'm so excited for like all the outer planets to change signs. I'm like, let's get some new energy in here, stir it up.
Yes, honestly, it's been so stagnaty over these last couple of years. So this is the year that if you want something to happen, just take that step. Okay, just change one thing. I promise. Promise, promise, promise.
Yes, it'll ripple out.
Hmm.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Tasha. This has been a joy.
Oh,
And to my listeners here, thank you so much for listening. And as always, happy shuffling.